The world's descent into war was no accident. It was a slow, painful march fueled by old wounds and new ambitions. The First World War left Europe shattered, nations broken, economies ruined, and a generation lost. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to secure peace, instead bred resentment in Germany, forcing blame, reparations, and humiliation. In that soil, anger grew. In Italy, Mussolini promised a return to Roman glory. In Japan, military leaders dreamed of empire. In Germany, Adolf Hitler rose, vowing to tear up the treaty and restore German pride. Desperate for hope, people followed him, and the world, distracted by the Great Depression, looked away. Britain and France, haunted by memories of the last war, pursued appeasement, giving in to Hitler's demands, hoping to avoid conflict. But each concession only fueled his ambition, rearming, marching into the Rhineland, annexing Austria, demanding Czechoslovakia. The fire of war, once lit, spread quickly. On September 1, 1939, German tanks stormed into Poland. This time, Britain and France declared war. The Second World War had begun, a war born of unresolved anger, radical ideologies, and a world too slow to act. The darkness fell across Europe, and no one knew when the dawn would return. The seeds of war had been sown long before the first shot was fired. The world's hope for peace was crushed under the weight of old grievances and unchecked ambition. The stage was set for a conflict that would engulf the globe. The world would soon learn the cost of failing to confront tyranny. The march to war was over. The battle for the future had begun. The world would never be the same. The Second World War was not inevitable, but it became unstoppable. The long night had begun. The world split into two camps, the Axis and the Allies. The Axis, Germany, Italy, and Japan, were united by ambition and contempt for democracy. Hitler's Germany sought empire and racial purity. Mussolini's Italy dreamed of Roman glory, and Japan aimed to dominate Asia. Opposing them were the Allies, Britain, France, and later the Soviet Union and the United States. Britain, led by Winston Churchill, stood alone after France fell, refusing to surrender. Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 brought Stalin's vast resources to the Allied side. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor awakened the United States, unleashing its industrial might. The lines were drawn. The fate of the world hung in the balance. The Allies fought for freedom and survival. The Axis fought for domination. The world was at war, and every nation would be changed by the outcome. The alliances would shape the course of history. Germany's blitzkrieg swept through Europe with terrifying speed. Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries, and then France fell in rapid succession. The world was stunned as France collapsed in 6 weeks, and British forces barely escaped at Dunkirk, rescued by a flotilla of civilian boats. With France gone, Britain stood alone. Hitler planned to invade, but first needed to control the skies. The Battle of Britain raged in the air. Outnumbered RAF pilots, the few, held off the Luftwaffe, and Hitler's invasion was cancelled. Frustrated, Hitler turned east, launching Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union in 1941. 3 million German soldiers invaded, expecting a quick victory. But the vastness of Russia and the brutal winter stalled them. The war in Europe entered a new, bloodier phase. The German advance slowed, and the Soviets prepared to strike back. The early years belonged to Germany, but the tide was beginning to turn. The world watched as the conflict spread and intensified. The cost in lives and destruction mounted with each passing month. Europe became a continent of ruins and refugees. The war's outcome was far from certain. The struggle for survival had only just begun. The fate of nations hung in the balance. The world braced for what was to come. The darkest days were still ahead. While Europe burned, Japan pursued its imperial ambitions in Asia, clashing with the United States over resources. Roosevelt's embargo on oil and steel pushed Japan to a fateful decision war with America. On December 7, 1941, Japanese planes attacked Pearl Harbor, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet. America, shocked and enraged, declared war. Japan's forces swept across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, conquering territory with alarming speed. Allied forces were overwhelmed. Prisoners suffered brutal treatment, as in the Bataan Death March. Yet hope flickered. The Doolittle raid on Tokyo showed Japan was not invincible. The U.S. industrial machine began to mobilize, promising a long, hard fight ahead. The Pacific became a vast battleground of islands and ocean. The war would be fought with ferocity and sacrifice on both sides. The sleeping giant was awake and determined. The tide would soon begin to turn. The struggle for the Pacific would shape the outcome of the war. The world watched as two empires clashed. The fight for the Pacific was just beginning. The Eastern Front was a war of annihilation between Hitler and Stalin. After initial German advances, the Soviets made their stand at Stalingrad in 1942. The battle became a brutal, close-quarters struggle, street by street, building by building. The Germans captured most of the city, but Soviet defenders held on. In November, the Red Army encircled the German Sixth Army, trapping hundreds of thousands. Hitler refused retreat. His army starved and froze. By February 1943, the Germans surrendered. Stalingrad was a turning point. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. From then on, the Red Army pushed west, driving the Nazis back toward Berlin. The Eastern Front became the deadliest theater of the war. The scale of suffering was immense, but the tide had turned. The Soviets would not stop until the war was won. The fate of Europe was being decided in the East. By 1944, the Allies prepared to liberate Western Europe with Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion of Normandy. Southern England became a vast military camp. Deception misled the Germans about the invasion's location. On June 6, 1944, Allied paratroopers landed behind enemy lines, followed by a massive seaborne assault on 5 beaches. Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword saw success, but at Omaha Beach, American troops faced fierce resistance and heavy losses. Slowly, through courage and sacrifice, the Allies broke through. By day's end, they had a foothold in France. The cost was high, but the beachhead was secure. Over 1 million Allied soldiers would pour into France, pushing the Germans back. D-Day marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The liberation of Europe was underway. The Allies advanced, village by village, toward Berlin. The final battles loomed on the horizon. The world watched as the tide of war shifted. The end of the conflict was in sight. The hope for peace grew stronger. For the ordinary soldier, war was about survival and the man beside you. Life was mud, fear, exhaustion, and moments of terror. Whether in Russia's snow, the Pacific's jungles, or Normandy's hedgerows. Orders, weather, and the enemy dictated every day. Boredom and waiting gave way to sudden, violent combat. Soldiers learned to live with death, to fight for each other above all. The bond between comrades was unbreakable. In Europe, it was a war of attrition. In the Pacific, a brutal struggle against an enemy who rarely surrendered. The psychological toll was immense, leaving scars that lasted a lifetime. Survivors returned home changed, carrying both visible and invisible wounds. They had seen the worst and best of humanity: courage, sacrifice, and brotherhood. They answered the call and paid a heavy price. Their legacy endures in the freedom they preserved. The war was fought not just on battlefields but in factories, farms, and homes. In the U.S., Pearl Harbor ended the Depression. Factories roared to life, producing the arsenal of democracy. Women filled jobs left by men, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, challenging old roles. African Americans moved north for defense jobs, fueling the civil rights movement. Rationing, victory gardens, and scrap drives became part of daily life. Propaganda urged unity and sacrifice, but fear led to injustice. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned, losing homes and freedom. The home front was a place of unity and sacrifice, but also of prejudice and loss. The war changed society, opening new opportunities and exposing deep flaws. Everyone felt part of the struggle, for better or worse. The war effort united nations, but also revealed their contradictions. The impact of the home front would last long after the fighting ended. The world was transformed by total war. The lessons of sacrifice and injustice would echo for generations. By spring 1945, Allied armies closed in on Germany. Hitler, defeated, took his own life. On May 8th, Germany surrendered. VE Day. Crowds celebrated, but the horrors of the Holocaust were just being uncovered. The liberation of concentration camps revealed the full scale of Nazi crimes, millions murdered in the Holocaust. The world vowed never again, but the lesson would be tested. In the Pacific, Japan fought on fiercely. The battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa showed the cost of invasion would be immense. President Truman faced a terrible choice: use the atomic bomb or risk countless lives. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The war was over. World War II was the deadliest conflict in history. Over 70 million dead, old empires shattered, and a new world order born. The United States and Soviet Union emerged as superpowers. The Cold War began. The United Nations was created hoping to prevent future wars. The atomic bomb changed warfare forever, ushering in a new age of anxiety. Remembering World War II is about more than battles and dates. It's about honoring sacrifice and learning the cost of hatred and indifference. The war's legacy is a warning and a hope. The world was forever changed by the choices made and the price paid. The lessons of World War II remain urgent today. Freedom is fragile and peace must be defended. The story of the Second World War is a story for all humanity. We remember so the darkness does not return.